Picture this, a city of clay and ambition, rising from the sun-scorched plains where two rivers kiss, its ziggurats piercing the sky like the dreams of gods. Welcome to Uruk, 2500 BCE, where the air hums with the clatter of markets, the chant of priests, and the faint, sweet tang of fermenting barley. This is no ordinary place, and tonight on History Orbit we're diving into a world where every sip, every scent, every ritual could lift you closer to the divine or leave you stumbling in the dust, wondering what you said to that statue last night. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because we're about to unravel Mesopotamia's mind-bending rituals in a way that'll make you feel like you're right there, clay cup in hand under a starlit sky. Let's step into the sandals of Inanna-Sar, a priestess of the goddess Inanna, as she navigates the sacred and slightly wild world of Uruk's Akitu Festival. Her story begins with a brew so potent it was considered a gift from the gods themselves, a drink that fueled both body and soul in a civilization that didn't just live history, it brewed it, burned it, and occasionally saw visions because of it. Inanna-Sar moved through the temple courtyard, her linen robes brushing against the warm stone, her eyes fixed on the clay vats bubbling in the shade of a date palm. The air was thick with the scent of Sakharu, Mesopotamia's sacred beer, a frothy, golden elixir that wasn't just a drink, but a currency, a prayer, and a party all rolled into one. In Uruk, Sakharu was life. Cuneiform tablets, those wedge-scratched records of a meticulous people, tell us that every citizen, from the lowliest laborer to the high priest, received daily rations of this liquid gold. Workers hauling bricks for the Ziggurats' endless steps were paid in jugs of it. Priests offered it to Enki, the god of wisdom and water, and families shared it at feasts, passing communal straws to filter out the chunky bits of fermented barley. Yes, chunky, because this wasn't your crisp, modern IPA. Sakharu was a thick, porridge-like brew, cloudy with sediment, sweetened with dates or honey, and just potent enough to make the world feel a little softer around the edges. Imagine sipping oatmeal that whispers, "You're having a great day, aren't you?" Inanna-Sar knelt beside a vat, her fingers tracing the rim as she checked the fermentation. The Akitu Festival was days away, a celebration of renewal where Uruk's people would honor Inanna's triumph over chaos. And the beer had to be perfect. The recipe was ancient, passed down through generations of priestesses, barley, malted and mashed, mixed with water from the Euphrates, then left to ferment under the watchful eye of the temple. But this wasn't just any batch. For the festival, they'd added a secret ingredient, a whisper of something sacred, something that could make the drinker feel as if the gods themselves were humming in their veins. Inanna-Sar's mentor, the high priestess Ninsen-Lil, had taught her the art of brewing as a sacred act. The barley is Enki's gift, Ninsen-Lil would say, her voice low and reverent, but the brew is ours to perfect. It binds us to the divine, to the earth, to each other. The process was meticulous. The barley was soaked, sprouted, and ground into a coarse meal, then mixed with water and date syrup to coax the sugars into fermentation. Herbs like coriander or bitter roots were sometimes tossed in, not just for flavor, but for their subtle magic. Some said they sharpened the mind, others that they loosened the tongue. Inanna-Sar stirred the vat, watching bubbles rise like tiny prayers, each one a promise of the festival to come. The people of Uruk didn't just drink Sakharu for fun, though fun was certainly part of it. It was a staple, a food group, a survival tool in a land where the river water could betray you with disease. Boiled and fermented, Sakharu was safer than the Euphrates, more reliable than a merchant's promise. Archaeological digs at sites like reveal vats and straws designed to sip this thick brew, confirming its place in daily life. Workers on the Ziggurats, those towering temples to the gods, were given liters of it daily, enough to keep them nourished, slightly buzzed, and motivated to drag limestone blocks under a merciless sun. Imagine building a skyscraper while sipping a mildly alcoholic smoothie, and you're halfway there. Inanna-Sar's role was to ensure the temple's Sakharu was ready for the Akitu, where it would flow like the rivers themselves. The festival was no mere party. It was a cosmic reset, a time when the people reenacted the creation of the world with Inanna at its heart. The beer wasn't just refreshment, it was a conduit to the divine, a way to honor the gods while loosening the mortal coil. Inanna-Sar could already picture the scene, torchlit courtyards, the rhythmic beat of drums, and hundreds of voices chanting hymns as the sakaru was poured into wide, shallow bowls. Men and women, nobles and laborers would dip their straws, their laughter growing louder as the night deepened. But there was more to this brew than met the eye. Whispers among the priestesses spoke of a rare herb, one not listed in the temple's official recipes, added only for the most sacred nights. Inanna-Sar had heard its name in hushed tones, shama, a plant said to make the drinker see beyond the veil of the mortal world. Was it true, or just a tale to spice up the long hours of brewing? She wasn't sure, but the thought sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of curiosity. What was it like to taste the god's own secrets? The courtyard buzzed with activity as other priestesses prepared offerings, baskets of figs, jars of honey, and bundles of dried herbs to be burned as incense. Inanna-Sar's friend Enhedu, a younger priestess with a mischievous streak, sidled up to her. They say the sakaru this year will make even the scribes forget their numbers, Enhedu teased, her eyes glinting. Inanna-Sar laughed, but her mind was on the herb. If it's as strong as you say, Enhedu, we'll need more than clay tablets to keep track of the revelers. The bounty was light, but the weight of the festival loomed. The Akitu wasn't just a celebration, it was a test of the temple's power, a display of Uruk's devotion to Inanna. A flawed brew could mean a flawed offering, and no one wanted to anger a goddess known for both love and war. As the sun dipped below the ziggurat, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Inanna-Sar tasted the sakaru. It was rich, slightly tart, with a warmth that spread from her throat to her chest. Not bad, she thought, but it needed something, perhaps a touch more date syrup, or perhaps that mysterious shama. She imagined the festival night, the people swaying under the stars, their voices rising in a chorus that felt like it could reach the heavens. The sakaru wasn't just a drink, it was a bridge, a way to blur the line between mortal and divine, between the dust of Uruk and the eternal realm of the gods. Inanna-Sar's thoughts were interrupted by a low chant from the temple's inner sanctum. The priests were beginning their evening prayers, their voices weaving through the air like threads in a loom. She glanced at the vats, now covered with woven mats to protect them from the night's chill. The sakaru would be ready, but the real question was whether she was ready for what came next. The festival wasn't just about brewing and drinking, it was about transformation, about stepping into the unknown. And if the whispers about shama were true, the unknown might be closer than she thought. As she walked toward the temple, the scent of fermenting barley lingered in her wake, mingling with the faint perfume of water lilies drying on racks nearby. Those flowers, delicate and pale, were the next piece of the ritual puzzle, their petals destined to infuse the wine that would flow alongside the sakaru. Inanna-Sar couldn't help but wonder if the beer could warm the soul. What might the lilies do to the mind? The answer lay just beyond the temple gates, where the night promised secrets as intoxicating as the brew itself. Inanna-Sar stepped through the temple gates, her sandals whispering against the polished stone as the chant of the priests faded into a soft hum. Behind her, the air was cooler now, tinged with the damp breath of the Euphrates, and her thoughts lingered on the sakaru vats, their bubbles promising a festival that would blur the line between earth and sky. But her attention shifted to the racks of drying water lilies, their pale petals catching the moonlight like delicate offerings to Inanna herself. These were no ordinary flowers. In Uruk, the water lily, plucked from the river's edge where the reeds bowed to the current, was a sacred gift, its beauty matched only by its power to stir the soul. As Inanna-Sar approached the racks, her fingers brushed a petal, soft as a whisper, and she felt a thrill of anticipation. The Akitu Festival was not just about the beer that warmed the body. It was about the wine that lifted the mind, infused with these lilies, which the priests claimed could carry you to the edge of the divine. Tonight, she would learn to prepare this sacred brew, a task that felt like holding a piece of the cosmos in her hands. The temple courtyard was alive with the quiet bustle of preparation, priestesses moving like shadows as they sorted herbs, polished clay cups, and whispered prayers to ensure the god's favor. Inanna-Sar's mentor, Ninsenlil, stood by a low table, her hands deftly sorting lily petals into a basket. "The lily is Inanna's mirror," Ninsenlil said, her voice steady, but laced with a knowing edge. "It reflects her beauty, her power, and her mystery. Treat it with care, for it can open doors to places even we cannot fully understand. Inanna-Sar nodded, her curiosity piqued. The water lily, known in the temple as Nufaru, was more than an ornament. Cuneiform texts, etched with the precision of a scribe's stylus, describe its use in rituals dating back to the earliest days of Uruk. Archaeologists have found traces of these flowers in temple offerings, their petals preserved in the dust of centuries, suggesting they were as vital to Mesopotamian worship as the Sakharu itself. The lilies grew in the shallows of the Euphrates, their roots tangled in the river's embrace, and the priests believed they carried the essence of Inanna, goddess of love, war, and rebirth. To drink them was to invite her presence, to feel her breath in your thoughts, her fire in your veins. Inanna-Sar watched as Ninsenlil demonstrated the preparation, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The petals were dried for days under the sun, their edges curling like tiny scrolls, then soaked in wine made from the grapes of Kish, a city famed for its vineyards. The process was simple but sacred. The petals were steeped for 3 days, stirred at dawn and dusk with a reed plucked from the same river bank. The result was a wine that shimmered with a faint golden hue, its aroma sweet yet sharp, like the promise of a dream you couldn't quite recall. Inanna-Sar inhaled deeply as Ninsenlil lifted a small jug, pouring a sample into a clay cup. "Taste it," Ninsenlil urged, her eyes glinting with something unspoken. Inanna-Sar hesitated, then sipped. The liquid cooled against her lips, its flavor a dance of honey and earth, with a strange warmth that lingered on her tongue. For a moment, the world seemed to soften, the edges of the courtyard blurring as if the stars themselves had leaned closer. It wasn't drunkenness, not exactly, but a gentle lift, a feeling that the veil between her and the gods had grown thin. The water lily's power, subtle yet undeniable, was no myth. Scholars today believe these lilies, likely Nymphea alba or a similar species, contained mild psychoactive compounds not unlike the blue lotus of Egypt. Texts from the period, including temple inventories, list Nufaru alongside offerings of myrrh and barley, suggesting its use in rituals was both common and sacred. The effect was not overwhelming. Inanna-Sar didn't forget her name or stumble into a vision, but it was enough to make the chants of the Akitu Festival feel like they were rising from her own chest, enough to make the torchlight flicker like the pulse of the universe. She set the cup down, her heart quickening. "This is what we'll serve at the festival?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ninsenlil smiled, a rare crack in her stern facade. "This and more. The wine is only the beginning. It prepares the heart for what comes next." Inanna-Sar's mind raced, recalling the whispers of Shama, the forbidden herb that Enhedu had teased about. Was it part of this wine, or something else entirely? She didn't dare ask, not yet, but the question burned in her like a coal. The courtyard grew quieter as the other priestesses finished their tasks, the racks of lilies now neatly sorted, their petals ready for the vats of wine that would line the festival tables. Inanna-Sar imagined the scene, nobles in their finest linen, their jewelry glinting in the firelight, raising cups of lily wine as they toasted Inanna's glory. The common folk would join too, their straws dipping into communal jugs, their laughter mingling with the hymns. But it wasn't just the taste or the buzz that made the wine sacred. It was the story it carried, the myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld and her triumphant return, a cycle of death and rebirth mirrored in every sip. The lily, with its roots in the dark riverbed and its petals reaching for the sun, was her symbol, a reminder that even in the depths, there was light to be found. Inanna-Sar's thoughts were interrupted by Enhedu, who appeared at her side, her hands dusted with pollen from the lilies. "I heard the nobles are already betting on who'll drink the most without falling over," Enhedu said, her grin wide. "Last year, Lord Enkidu swore he saw Inanna herself in the flames after 3 cups. Inanna-Sar laughed, but her mind was elsewhere, picturing the festival's peak, when the wine would flow and the boundaries between mortal and divine would blur. The lily wine wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual, a way to step into Inanna's story, to feel her power in your bones. The temple taught that to drink it was to commune with the goddess, to let her fire and grace wash over you. But Inanna-Sar couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, something the priests whispered about in the shadowed corners of the Ziggurat. As she helped Ninsenlil seal the wine jugs, she noticed a small basket of dried lilies set aside, their petals darker, almost purple, unlike the others. "Those are for the inner sanctum," Ninsenlil said, catching her gaze. "Not for the common feast." Inanna-Sar's pulse quickened. The inner sanctum was where the high priests performed the most sacred rites, where only the initiated could enter. Was this where the Shama came in, or something else entirely? She wanted to ask, but Ninsenlil's expression was unreadable, her hands already moving to the next task. The courtyard was now bathed in moonlight, the racks of lilies glowing like a field of stars on earth. Inanna-Sar felt the weight of her role, not just as a priestess, but as a keeper of secrets. The Sakaru had been the first step, a grounding force, a drink that tied the people to the land and to each other. But the lily wine was different. It was a ladder to the heavens, a potion that could make you feel as if you were floating among the constellations. She imagined the festival night, the air thick with music and the scent of wine, the people swaying as if the river itself moved through them. But what lay beyond the wine? What happened when the inner sanctum's doors opened and the priests lit their braziers, filling the air with smoke that carried more than just fragrance? Inanna-Sar's thoughts were cut short by a distant sound, the low, rhythmic thud of a drum from the temple's heart. It was the signal for the night's final preparations, the moment when the priestesses would gather to bless the offerings. She glanced at the lily racks one last time, their petals a silent promise of the wonders to come. The wine would flow, the people would sing. But the real magic, she sensed, was in what came next, the smoke that curled from the braziers, the scent that could carry you beyond the stars. As she followed Ninsenlil toward the temple's inner chambers, the night seemed to hum with possibility, each step pulling her closer to a mystery she was only beginning to understand. Inanna-Sar followed Ninsenlil through the shadowed corridors of the temple, the distant thud of the drum echoing in her chest like a second heartbeat, pulling her deeper into the heart of Uruk's sacred mysteries. The scent of lily wine still lingered on her lips, its gentle warmth curling through her thoughts. But now a new fragrance teased the air, sharp and resinous, like a promise woven from cedar and myrrh. The temple's inner chambers loomed ahead, their limestone walls etched with cuneiform prayers that seemed to pulse in the flickering torchlight. Inanna-Sar's sandals whispered against the floor, her mind racing with questions about the Shama and the darkened lilies set aside for the inner sanctum. But as she stepped into the chamber, her breath caught not from the wine's lingering spell, but from the sight of a brazier glowing at the room's center, its coals breathing wisps of smoke that curled upward like spirits seeking the stars. This was Connectum, the sacred incense of Mesopotamia, a blend so potent it was said to summon the gods themselves. And tonight, Inanna-Sar would learn its secrets. The chamber was small but heavy with purpose, its walls adorned with reliefs of Inanna, her lion at her side, her eyes fierce yet tender. Ninsenlil knelt beside the brazier, her hands steady as she crumbled a pellet of Connectum onto the coals. The smoke rose instantly, thick and fragrant, filling the room with a scent that was both earthy and divine, like a forest after a storm or a prayer caught in the wind. Inanna-Sar's eyes watered slightly, not from irritation but from the sheer intensity of the aroma, which seemed to seep into her skin, her thoughts, her very soul. "This is the breath of the gods," Ninsenlil said, her voice low, almost lost in the haze. "It purifies, it elevates, it opens the way for Inanna to hear us." Inanna-Sar nodded, her gaze fixed on the brazier where the smoke danced in patterns that seemed almost alive. In Mesopotamia, incense was no mere air freshener, it was a bridge to the divine, a tool as essential as the Sakaru or the lily wine. Cuneiform records from Uruk's temples list Connectum among the offerings, its ingredients myrrh, cedar, juniper, and sometimes honey or frankincense carefully sourced from distant lands via trade routes, stretching to the Levant and beyond. Archaeological digs have uncovered braziers and residue of these resins in temple complexes, confirming their centrality to rituals. The smoke was believed to carry prayers to the heavens to cleanse the body of impurities and, in some cases, to induce a state of mind where the mortal world faded, leaving only the presence of the gods. Inanna-Sar watched as Ninsenlil added another pellet, the smoke thickening, its tendrils curling around the reliefs on the walls, making Inanna's carved face seem to shimmer. The priestess's movements were precise, each gesture a ritual in itself, honed by years of devotion. The connectum is not just burned, Ninsenlil explained, her eyes reflecting the brazier's glow. It is crafted. Every ingredient, every measure is a choice. Myrrh for purification, cedar for strength, juniper for clarity. Together, they speak to Inanna, but they also speak to us. Inanna-Sar inhaled deeply, feeling the smoke settle in her chest, warm and heavy, like a hand pressing gently against her heart. The sensation was different from the lily wine, less a softening of the world and more an expansion, as if the chamber's walls were stretching outward, the air itself humming with possibility. She wondered if this was what the priests meant when they spoke of seeing beyond, a phrase she'd heard in whispers but never fully understood. The temple's records, etched in clay, described connectum as a tool for ritual purification, used in everything from daily offerings to the elaborate ceremonies of the Akitu Festival. But there were hints in the oldest texts of something more, accounts of priests entering trance-like states, their voices changing, their bodies swaying as if possessed by the divine. Inanna-Sar had always thought these were exaggerations, stories to inspire in the uninitiated. But now, standing in the smoke-filled chamber, she wasn't so sure. The air felt charged, as if the gods were listening, waiting for the right moment to speak. Ninsenlil handed her a small clay tablet, its surface etched with instructions for preparing the incense. "Read it," she said, her tone both command and invitation. Inanna-Sar traced the wedges with her finger, deciphering the recipe: myrrh from the south, cedar from the mountains, juniper gathered under a waxing moon. The tablet also mentioned a rare resin, labdenu, imported from distant shores, said to deepen the trance and sharpen visions. Inanna-Sar's heart skipped a beat. Was this the secret of the inner sanctum, the key to the mysteries Enhedu had teased about? She glanced at Ninsenlil, but the high priestess's face was unreadable, her attention fixed on the brazier. The smoke was now so thick that the chamber felt like a dreamscape, the walls fading into a haze where shapes seemed to move, fleeting and indistinct. Inanna-Sar blinked, unsure if it was the smoke or her imagination, but for a moment she thought she saw a lion's silhouette in the curls, its eyes glinting like Inanna's own. She shook her head, trying to focus, but the sensation lingered, a quiet thrill that made her feel both grounded and untethered. The preparation of connectum was an art, as much alchemy as devotion. The ingredients were ground into a fine powder, mixed with honey or wine to form pellets, then dried until they were ready to burn. Each temple had its own recipe, guarded like a royal seal, and Uruk's was renowned for its potency. Inanna-Sar remembered the stories her mother used to tell, of priests who burned connectum during the Akitu, and claimed to see Inanna herself, her form rising from the smoke, her voice whispering prophecies. As a child, Inanna-Sar had thought these were tales to scare or inspire, but now, surrounded by the fragrant haze, she wondered if there was truth in them. The smoke seemed to carry her thoughts upward, loosening the knots of doubt and fear, making her feel as if she could ask the gods anything, and they might answer. Ninsenlil's voice broke through her reverie. The connectum is for the festival's climax, when the people gather at the Ziggurats base, and the priests ascend to offer Inanna-s gifts. But it is also for the dead. Inanna-Sar's eyes widened. The dead. She knew incense was burned during burials, its smoke meant to guide souls to the underworld, but she hadn't connected it to the festival. Ninsenlil continued, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. When we burn connectum, we honor those who have gone before, ensuring their spirits join the celebration. The smoke carries their names to Inanna, so they may feast with us in eternity. Inanna-Sar thought of the tombs outside Uruk, their entrances sealed with clay, their interiors filled with offerings of bread, beer and incense. Excavations at sites like her reveal vessels containing myrrh and juniper, placed alongside the dead to ease their journey. The idea that the living and the dead could share a festival, bound by the same smoke, sent a shiver through her. It was as if Uruk's history, its people, its gods were all woven into this single, fragrant thread, rising from the brazier to the heavens. She wanted to ask about the labdenu, about the visions, but the words caught in her throat. The smoke was doing something to her, not overwhelming, but subtle, like a hand guiding her thoughts to places she hadn't dared explore. She imagined the festival night, the ziggurat aglow with torches, the air thick with connectum, the people below swaying to the rhythm of drums, their minds lifted by the lily wine and now this sacred smoke. Would they see what she was seeing, these fleeting shapes in the haze? Would they feel Inanna's presence, or was that reserved for the priests in the inner sanctum? Enhedu slipped into the chamber, her presence a welcome jolt of familiarity. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she whispered, her grin teasing but her eyes curious. Inanna-Sar managed a smile, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in the smoke's embrace. "Maybe I have," she murmured, half joking, half serious. Enhedu raised an eyebrow, then glanced at the brazier. "Wait until the festival. They say the Connectum makes the stars sing." Inanna-Sar laughed, but the image stuck with her, stars singing, their voices mingling with the chants, the smoke carrying them all into a realm where time and mortality blurred. She wanted to know more, to understand the full power of the incense, but Ninsenlil was already moving, placing the tablet back in its niche and gesturing for Inanna-Sar to follow. "Come," she said, "we must prepare the braziers for the festival. The people will expect the gods to be present, and we must ensure they are." As they worked, Inanna-Sar's thoughts drifted to the Akitu itself, the moment when the city would come alive with music, dance, and offerings. The Sakaru would ground them, the lily wine would lift them. But the Connectum, this was something else, a force that could transform a festival into a communion, a night into eternity. She helped Ninsenlil arrange the braziers, their surfaces edged with symbols of Inanna's star, each one positioned to catch the wind and carry the smoke over the Ziggurats steps. The task was methodical, but her mind was alive with questions. What was the Labdeinu? Was it the same as the Shama Enhedu had mentioned, or something different? And what happened when the priests burned it in the inner sanctum, behind closed doors where only the initiated could go? The chamber grew quiet, the other priestesses finishing their tasks and slipping out into the night. Inanna-Sar lingered, watching the brazier's coals fade to a soft glow, the last tendrils of smoke curling upward like a final prayer. She felt different, not just from the smoke but from the weight of what she was learning, the secrets she was brushing against. The Akitu was no longer just a festival, it was a journey, one she was only beginning to understand. As she stepped out into the courtyard, the night air was cool against her skin, the stars above Uruk sharp and bright. The drum's rhythm had stopped, replaced by the distant sound of laughter from the city below, where the people were already preparing for the festival. Inanna-Sar's heart beat faster, not with fear but with anticipation. The Connectum had opened a door, just a crack, to something vast and unknowable. But the festival was coming, and with it, a night of divine frenzy where the smoke, the wine, and the beer would weave together into something greater, something that could shake the very foundations of Uruk. She glanced back at the temple, its silhouette stark against the sky, and wondered what it would feel like to stand at the Ziggurats' peak, the city below her, the gods above, and the smoke carrying her into the heart of the divine. The answer, she knew, was waiting in the festival's chaos, where the line between mortal and god would blur in ways she could only imagine. Inanna-Sar stepped out from the temple's shadowed embrace, the cool night air brushing her skin as the distant laughter of Uruk's people rose like a tide, mingling with the faint scent of Connectum still clinging to her robes. The stars above glittered fiercely, as if mirroring the anticipation pulsing through her veins, each one a silent witness to the Akitu Festival that loomed closer with every passing hour. The city was alive, its narrow streets buzzing with preparations, merchants stacking clay jugs of Sakaru, weavers draping the Ziggurats' steps with bright linens, and children darting through the crowds, their voices high with excitement. Inanna-Sar's heart beat in time with the rhythm of Uruk, her thoughts swirling with the lessons of the temple, the bubbling vats of beer, the shimmering lily wine, the smoke that seemed to whisper secrets of the gods. But tonight was different. Tonight the Akitu Festival would unfold a celebration that was less a ritual and more a cosmic dance, where the people of Uruk would surrender to Inanna's power, their bodies and souls caught in a frenzy that blurred the mortal and the divine. Inanna-Sar made her way toward the Ziggurat, its massive silhouette dominating the city like a mountain born of human hands. The air grew warmer as she approached, thick with the scents of roasted barley, crushed herbs, and the sweet tang of fermenting fruit. Torches lined the paths, their flames casting flickering shadows that danced like spirits across the limestone steps. She could hear the low thrum of drums, not yet the wild beat of the festival's peak, but a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Inanna-Sar's role as a priestess was to oversee the offerings, to ensure the sukaru flowed. The lily wine sparkled and the canictum burned without falter. But as she climbed the Ziggurats' lower steps, her thoughts were on the festival's deeper purpose, to reenact Inanna's triumph over chaos, to renew the world through ecstasy and devotion. Cuneiform texts etched by scribes who knew the weight of their words described the Akitu as a moment when Uruk's people became one with their goddess, their voices dances, and drinks a collective prayer to keep the cosmos in balance. The festival was not just a party, it was a sacred act, a way to ensure the rivers would flow, the crops would grow, and the gods would not turn their backs on their city. Inanna-Sar reached the Ziggurats' first terrace, where a crowd was already gathering, their faces lit by torchlight, their eyes bright with anticipation. Nobles in linen robes mingled with laborers in simpler tunics, their differences blurred by the shared promise of the night. Clay tables groaned under the weight of jugs filled with sukaru and lily wine, their surfaces adorned with baskets of figs, dates, and flatbreads baked with sesame. Inanna-Sar spotted Enhedu near a table, her hands busy pouring wine into shallow bowls, her laughter cutting through the chatter. "You're late," Enhedu called, her grin wide as she handed Inanna-Sar a cup. The nobles are already arguing over who gets the first sip. Inanna-Sar took the cup, its contents gleaming gold in the firelight, and smiled. "Let them argue. Inanna will decide who's worthy tonight." The wine's aroma hit her, sharp and floral, a reminder of the lilies she'd prepared under Ninsen-Lil's watchful eye. She took a sip, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her, loosening her thoughts, making the crowd's murmur seem like a song. The festival was beginning, and with it, the frenzy that would carry Uruk into the divine. The drums grew louder, their rhythm joined by the wail of reed pipes and the pluck of lyres, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth and spiral toward the stars. Inanna-Sar moved through the crowd, her robes brushing against revelers as she checked the offerings. The sukaru jugs were already half empty, their straws passed from hand to hand, the thick brew leaving smiles and slurred hymns in its wake. The lily wine, served in smaller cups for its potency, was reserved for the nobles and priests. But Inanna-Sar noticed even the laborers sneaking sips, their eyes wide with the thrill of tasting something sacred. She didn't stop them. The Akitu was for all of Uruk, a night when boundaries softened, when the gods walked among the people. As she reached the Ziggurats' second terrace, the air grew heavier, the canictum smoke curling from braziers like a living thing, its scent of myrrh and cedar wrapping the crowd in a haze that felt both grounding and otherworldly. The smoke mingled with the wine's effect, creating a sensation that made Inanna-Sar's steps feel lighter, her thoughts sharper yet somehow distant, as if she were both in her body and floating above it. The people around her swayed to the music, their movements slow at first, then wilder, their voices rising in chants that echoed Inanna's myths, her descent to the underworld, her battle with death, her triumphant return. Inanna-Sar joined the chant, her voice blending with the crowd's, her body moving to the drum's relentless beat. The festival was a celebration of Inanna's power, but it was also a release, a moment when Uruk's people could shed their daily burdens and become part of something greater. Archaeological evidence from Uruk's ruins shows the scale of these festivals. Massive vats for sukaru, altars stained with wine, and braziers filled with incense residue, all pointing to a city that poured its heart into these nights. The Akitu was a spectacle, but it was also a necessity, a way to align the human world with the divine, to ensure the gods' favor for another year. Inanna-Sar felt it now, the pull of the ritual, the way the sukaru, the wine, and the smoke wove together to create something more than the sum of their parts. She moved higher up the ziggurat, her eyes scanning the crowd below, their faces a blur of joy and devotion. Enhedu appeared at her side, her cheeks flushed from the wine, her voice bright. "They're saying this year's Akitu will outshine the last," she said, pointing to a group of dancers spinning in circles, their robes flaring like flames. "Look at them, Inanna-Sar. They're already half in the heavens." Inanna-Sar laughed, but her gaze drifted to the top of the ziggurat, where the high priests would soon ascend for the festival's climax. She'd heard stories of what happened there in the inner sanctum, where the connectum burned hottest and the air was thick with secrets. The crowd's energy was infectious, but Inanna-Sar's thoughts kept circling back to the whispers of Shama, the herb that Enhedu had teased about, the one Ninsen-Lil had hinted at with her cryptic words. Was it part of the wine, the smoke, or something else entirely? She wanted to ask Enhedu, but the younger priestess was already swept away by the crowd, her laughter trailing behind her like a melody. Inanna-Sar took another sip of the lily wine, feeling its warmth deepen, her senses sharpening even as her thoughts grew hazy. The drums were faster now, the pipes shriller, and the crowd's chants grew wilder, their words less coherent but heavy with meaning. She saw a noble stumble, his cup spilling wine onto the stone, his laughter loud and unguarded. A laborer caught him, their shared Sakura jug clinking against the ground, and for a moment, they were equals bound by the festival's magic. Inanna-Sar felt it too, the way the Akitu erased divisions, making Uruk one body, one voice, one prayer. But even as she swayed with the crowd, her mind was on the Ziggurats' peak, where the priests would soon light the final braziers, their smoke carrying the city's hopes to Inanna. She wondered what it would feel like to stand there, to breathe that air, to see what the high priest saw. The festival was building to something, a crescendo that would shake the very stones of Uruk, and Inanna-Sar was caught in its pull, her role as priestess both a privilege and a weight. She moved through the crowd, checking the braziers, their coals glowing like eyes in the night. The connectum smoke was thicker now, its scent mingling with the sweat and wine of the revelers, creating a heady mix that made the air feel alive. She saw faces she knew, merchants, scribes, even a shepherd who'd once brought a lamb to the temple as an offering, each one transformed by the night, their eyes bright with something more than wine or smoke. The Akitu was a mirror, reflecting Inanna's power, her ability to unite, to inspire, to push the boundaries of what it meant to be human. Inanna-Sar's thoughts were interrupted by a shout from the crowd, a cheer as a group of dancers formed a circle, their hands linked, their feet stomping in time with the drums. She joined them, her body moving instinctively, the rhythm pulling her in like a current. The Sakura had warned her, the lily wine had lifted her, and the connectum had opened her mind, but it was the dance that made her feel truly alive, as if she were part of Inanna herself, her steps a prayer, her breath a hymn. The crowd's energy surged, the ziggurat trembling beneath their feet, and for a moment, Inanna-Sar forgot her questions, her doubts, her curiosity about the Shama. There was only the now, the heat of the night, the pulse of the drums, the taste of wine on her lips. But as the dance slowed, her eyes caught a figure at the ziggurat's edge. A priest cloaked in dark linen, his face half hidden in the smoke. He was holding a small clay jar, its surface etched with unfamiliar symbols, and he was moving toward the inner sanctum, his steps deliberate, almost secretive. Inanna-Sar's heart quickened. Was this the Shama, the herb that could unlock visions, the one the priests guarded so fiercely? She wanted to follow to see what lay behind those closed doors, but the crowd pressed in, pulling her back into the dance. The drums were louder now, the pipes wilder, and the air was thick with smoke and anticipation. The festival was reaching its peak, but Inanna-Sar knew the real climax was yet to come, in the shadows of the inner sanctum, where the priests would burn something more potent than connectum, something that could change everything. As she spun with the dancers, her eyes locked on the priest's retreating figure, the jar in his hands a promise of secrets yet to be revealed. The night was young, the gods were near, and Inanna-Sar felt the pull of something greater, something that would carry her beyond the dance, beyond the ziggurat, into the heart of Uruk's deepest mysteries. Inanna-Sar's feet faltered in the dance, her eyes locked on the priest's retreating figure, the clay jar in his hands glinting faintly as it caught the torch light, before vanishing into the shadowed staircase leading to the ziggurat's inner sanctum. The Akitu Festival pulsed around her, a whirlwind of drums, laughter, and the heady mix of Sakura lily wine and connectum smoke, but her mind was tethered to that jar, its etched symbols whispering of secrets she wasn't meant to know. The crowd surged, pulling her back into the rhythm, their bodies swaying like reeds in the Euphrates, their voices a chorus of devotion to Inanna, goddess of love and war. Inanna-Sar's heart raced, not just from the wine's warmth or the smoke's lingering trance, but from the pull of the unknown, the mystery of Shama, the forbidden herb that Enhedu had teased about, that Ninsen-Lil had hinted at with her guarded words. She scanned the crowd for Enhedu, hoping her friend's mischievous grin might offer a clue. But the younger priestess was lost in the sea of revelers, her laughter swallowed by the drums. Inanna-Sar took a deep breath, the connectum smoke curling in her chest, sharpening her senses even as it softened the edges of the world. She knew she should stay with the dancers, tend the braziers, ensure the offerings flowed, but the priest's shadowed form lingered in her mind, a question that demanded an answer. The festival was at its peak, the ziggurat alive with movement, the air thick with the scents of myrrh, cedar, and fermenting barley. But Inanna-Sar felt a shift, a moment where the ordinary gave way to something extraordinary. She slipped through the crowd, her robes brushing against sweat-slicked arms and wine-stained linens, her steps careful but urgent as she moved toward the staircase. The inner sanctum was forbidden to all but the high priests, a place where the gods' true voices were said to speak. But the jar, the shama, was a law she couldn't resist. As she reached the base of the stairs, a hand caught her arm, firm but gentle. It was Ninsenlil, her eyes sharp despite the festival's haze. "Where are you going, Inanna-Sar?" she asked, her voice low, cutting through the din. Inanna-Sar froze, her pulse loud in her ears. "I saw a priest with a jar," she said, choosing her words carefully. It looked different, not like the others. Ninsenlil's expression didn't change, but her grip tightened briefly before releasing. "Some things are not for you to see. Not yet," she said, her tone neither harsh nor kind, but heavy with meaning. "Stay with the festival. The people need you here." Inanna-Sar nodded, her cheeks burning, but as Ninsenlil turned back to the crowd, she felt a spark of defiance. She was a priestess, trained to serve Inanna, to carry her light into the world. If Shama was part of the goddess's rites, didn't she deserve to know? The drums pounded louder, the crowd's chants rising to a fevered pitch, and Inanna-Sar rejoined the revelers, her body moving to the rhythm even as her mind churned. The Sakaru jugs were nearly empty now, their straws abandoned as the people drank directly from clay bowls, their laughter wild and unguarded. The lily wine cups gleamed in the torchlight, passed among the nobles who swayed with a grace that bordered on the divine. Inanna-Sar accepted a bowl from a smiling laborer, his face flushed with the night's excess, and took a sip, expecting the familiar tartness of Sakaru. But this was different, sharper, earthier, with a strange heat that spread through her like a spark catching dry reeds. She coughed, startled, and the laborer laughed. "Special batch," he said, winking. From the priest's own stalls, Inanna-Sar's eyes widened. Was this the Shama? She took another sip, cautious but curious, and the world shifted. The Ziggurats' steps seemed to ripple, the torchlight pulsing in time with the drums, the crowd's faces blurring into a mosaic of light and shadow. It wasn't the gentle lift of the lily wine or the expansive haze of the connectum. This was something fiercer, a sensation that made her feel as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind of the gods at her back. Her breath quickened and she set the bowl down, her hands trembling. The laborer was gone, swallowed by the crowd, and Inanna-Sar stood alone, the festival swirling around her like a storm. Archaeological evidence supports the use of cannabis, likely the Shama of Uruk's texts. In ancient Mesopotamia, residue found in temple vessels and burial sites suggests it was burned or ingested, often in elite rituals for its psychoactive properties. Cuneiform records from nearby cities like Lagash mention a plant used by priests to see the unseen, its effects reserved for those trained to withstand its power. Inanna-Sar, untrained and unprepared, felt the Shama's grip, her thoughts racing, her senses sharp yet scattered. She saw the ziggurat not as stone but as a living thing, its steps breathing, its peak a beacon calling her upward. Faces in the crowd seemed to shift, her mother's smile, her father's stern gaze, even Inanna herself, her lion's mane flowing in the smoke. Inanna-Sar blinked, trying to anchor herself, but the visions came faster. Fragments of memory and myth, the Euphrates glittering under a blood-red moon, a field of lilies swaying in an unseen wind, a voice whispering her name in a language she didn't know. She stumbled toward a brazier, its connectum smoke grounding her, pulling her back to the present. The festival roared on, oblivious to her inner storm, and she realized the Shama was no ordinary herb. It was a key, a door to the divine, but one that could overwhelm as easily as it enlightened. Inanna-Sar steadied herself, her breath slowing, but the visions lingered at the edges of her mind, like shadows cast by a fire she couldn't see. She looked toward the inner sanctum, its entrance now guarded by two priests, their faces stern in the torchlight. The jar, the Shama, was up there, she was sure of it, but so was Ninsen-Lil's warning. The festival's energy surged, the crowd's chants now a single voice, a hymn to Inanna's victory over chaos. Inanna-Sar joined the chant, her voice shaky but growing stronger, the Shama's effects fading but leaving a clarity she hadn't felt before. She understood now why the herb was forbidden to all but the initiated. It wasn't just its power, it was the responsibility it demanded, the need to navigate its visions without losing yourself. The priests used it to commune with the gods, to seek guidance for Uruk, but for the untrained, it was a fire that could burn to bright. Inanna-Sar moved through the crowd, her role as priestess pulling her back to her duties. She checked the braziers, their coals still glowing, the connectum smoke weaving through the air like a prayer. The lily wine cups were nearly gone, the nobles laughed louder, their movements looser, as if they too had tasted something stronger. She wondered how many others had sipped the Shama-laced brew. How many were seeing what she had seen? Enhedu appeared, her eyes bright with the festival's joy, but she paused when she saw Inanna-Sar's face. "You look like you've met Inanna herself," she said, her tone half teasing, half concerned. Inanna-Sar managed a smile, her mind still reeling. "Maybe I have," she said, echoing their earlier jest, but this time the words felt heavy, real. Enhedu tilted her head, curious, but before she could ask more, a shout rose from the crowd, drawing their attention to the Ziggurats' peak. The high priests were ascending, their robes catching the wind, their hands carrying braziers and jars that gleamed in the firelight. Inanna-Sar's heart skipped a beat. The inner sanctum's rites were beginning, the moment when the Shama would burn, its smoke carrying the priests beyond the mortal world. She wanted to be there, to see what they saw, but Ninsen-Lil's warning echoed in her mind. She stayed with the crowd, her body swaying to the drums, but her eyes were fixed on the Ziggurats' peak, where the smoke was rising thicker now. Its scent different, sharper, wilder, like the Shama she tasted. The festival was a living thing, a beast of sound and light and devotion, but Inanna-Sar felt a deeper pull, a call to understand the herb's true power, to know what it meant to stand in the god's presence. As the crowd chanted, their voices shaking the night, she realized the Shama was not just a secret. It was a test, one she had unwittingly taken and barely passed. The festival would end, the people would return to their lives, but the Shama's visions would linger, shaping her, pushing her toward a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The Ziggurat loomed above, its peak shrouded in smoke, and Inanna-Sar felt the weight of the night, the weight of Uruk, the weight of Inanna herself. The festival was not over, but its heart was shifting, moving from the chaos of the crowd to the quiet of the tombs, where the dead waited to join the living in their eternal dance. She took a step toward the Ziggurat's base, her eyes on the smoke, her heart on the edge of something vast, something that would carry her beyond the festival, into the realm of the gods and the ghosts who lingered in their shadow. Inanna-Sar stood at the Ziggurat's base, her eyes tracing the smoke. As it spiraled from the inner sanctum, its sharp wild scent lingering in the air, a reminder of the Shama that had briefly unraveled her senses and left her teetering on the edge of the divine. The Akitu Festival roared around her, its drums and chants a living pulse that shook the stones of Uruk, but her thoughts were drifting beyond the revelry, toward the quiet tombs that lay just outside the city where the dead waited in eternal silence. The Shama's visions still flickered at the corners of her mind lilies, swaying a lion's gaze, a voice calling her name, and she felt a strange pull, not upward to the Ziggurats' peak, where the priests communed with Inanna, but downward to the earth where the past and future met. The festival was a celebration of life, of Inanna's triumph over chaos, but it was also a bridge to the afterlife, a moment when the living and the dead shared the same sacred breath. Inanna-Sar's role as priestess had always been to serve the living, to pour the sakaru, to steep the lily wine, to burn the connectum. But tonight she understood that her duties extended beyond the Ziggurat steps to the tombs where offerings of beer, flowers and incense ensured the dead could join the feast. She moved through the crowd, her robes catching the torchlight, her steps steadier now as the Shama's effects faded, leaving behind a clarity that felt both heavy and bright. The revelers were a blur of motion, their faces flushed with wine and smoke, their voices a hymn to Inanna's eternal renewal. But Inanna-Sar's gaze was drawn to the city's edge, where the tombs of Uruk's ancestors lay beneath the stars, their entrances sealed with clay, their spirits tethered to the world by the offerings of the living. She remembered her mother's stories of the afterlife, a shadowy realm where the dead needed sustenance to endure, where a jug of sukaru or a handful of lilies could mean the difference between peace and restless wandering. Archaeological excavations at her reveal these truths in vivid detail. Tombs filled with clay vessels, their interiors stained with beer and wine alongside bundles of dried herbs and incense residues, all carefully placed to guide the dead through the underworld. Inanna-Sar's heart quickened as she approached a small altar near the Ziggurats' base, its surface covered with offerings for the departed, jugs of sukaru, bowls of lily wine, and tiny pellets of canictum ready to be burned. Her task was to prepare these gifts to ensure the dead were not forgotten during the Akitu's chaos, and she knelt beside the altar, her hands steady as she arranged the offerings with care. The crowd's energy swirled around her, but the altar was a quiet island, a place where time seemed to pause, where the living could whisper to those who had gone before. Inanna-Sar lifted a jug of sukaru, its weight familiar, its scent grounding her after the Shuma's disorienting fire. She poured a slow stream onto the altar, the beer soaking into the stone, a gift for the spirits who lingered just beyond the veil. "May you drink with us," she murmured, her voice soft but firm, a prayer she'd learned as a child but now felt with new depth. The act was simple, but its meaning was vast. In Mesopotamia, the dead were not separate from the living, they were part of the same cycle, bound by the same rituals, the same gods. Cuneiform texts from Uruk's temples describe these offerings in meticulous detail, listing jugs of beer, baskets of dates, and incense burned to honor ancestors during festivals like the Akitu. The dead, the texts say, needed to be fed to be remembered, lest they grow restless and bring misfortune to the city. Inanna-Sar understood this now, not just as a duty, but as a connection, a thread that tied her to her mother, her grandmother, to every priestess who had poured beer into the earth before her. As she placed a handful of dried lilies on the altar, their petals curling like tiny scrolls, she thought of Inanna's myth, her descent to the underworld, her sacrifice, her return. The goddess had faced death and emerged stronger, and the Akitu was a celebration of that cycle, a reminder that life and death were two sides of the same coin, each giving meaning to the other. The lilies, with their roots in the dark riverbed and their petals reaching for the sun, were a symbol of that journey, and Inanna-Sar felt a quiet pride in preparing them, knowing they would carry the dead closer to Inanna's light. The canictum pellets were next, their resinous scent rising as she placed them in a small brazier, their smoke curling upward like a prayer. The crowd's chants grew louder, the drums faster, but Inanna-Sar's focus was on the altar, on the act of remembering. She lit the brazier, watching the smoke rise, its fragrance mingling with the festival's chaos, a bridge between the living and the dead. She thought of her mother, gone these 3 years, her face clear in Inanna-Sar's mind as she whispered her name into the smoke. "Be with us," she said, her voice catching, and for a moment she felt a presence, not a vision like the Shuma's, but a warmth as if her mother's hand rested on her shoulder. The festival's energy surged, pulling her back to the present, and she stood, her eyes scanning the crowd for Enhedu. Her friend was near the Ziggurats' steps, her hands raised in dance, her laughter bright against the drums. Inanna-Sar smiled, the weight of the Shuma's visions lifting, replaced by a sense of purpose. The Akitu was not just about ecstasy or communion with the gods, it was about legacy, about ensuring that Uruk's story, its people, its dead, lived on. She rejoined the crowd, her body moving to the rhythm, but her mind was clearer now, sharpened by the offerings she'd made. The sukaru had grounded her, the lily wine had lifted her, the canictum had opened her, and the Shuma had tested her, but this act of honoring the dead felt like the truest ritual of all, the one that bound Uruk's past to its future. She saw Ninsen-Lil across the terrace, her mentor's eyes meeting hers, a flicker of approval in her gaze. Inanna-Sar wondered if Ninsen-Lil knew about the Shuma-laced brew, if she'd seen the visions in her own time, but the high priestess's face gave nothing away. The crowd parted as a group of priests descended from the inner sanctum, their braziers still smoking, their faces serene yet distant, as if they'd seen something beyond the mortal world. Inanna-Sar's curiosity flared, but she pushed it down, focusing on the altar, on the offerings that would carry the dead through the night. The festival was winding down, the drums slowing, the chants softening, but the energy lingered, a hum that seemed to vibrate through the ziggurat itself. Inanna-Sar moved among the revelers, helping to clear empty jugs, her hands steady despite the night's intensity. She saw the laborer who'd given her the shumma-laced brew, his smile sheepish now, as if he knew he'd shared something forbidden. She nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement, and he grinned, disappearing into the crowd. The ziggurat's steps were littered with spilled wine and scattered petals, a testament to the night's abandon, but Inanna-Sar felt a strange calm, as if the offerings to the dead had anchored her in a way the festival's frenzy could not. She thought of the tombs again, their quiet contrasting with the city's chaos, and realized that the Akitu was as much for them as for the living. The Sakaru, the lilies, the Connectum, they were gifts to Inanna, but also to the ancestors who watched from the shadows, their presence felt in every sip, every scent, every chant. Inanna-Sar's thoughts were interrupted by Enhedu, who appeared at her side, her eyes bright with exhaustion and joy. "You missed the best dance," Enhedu said, her voice hoarse from chanting, "but you look like you've been somewhere else entirely." Inanna-Sar smiled, her mind still half in the tunes, half in the festival's glow. "Maybe I have," she said, her words echoing their earlier jests but carrying a new weight. Enhedu tilted her head, curious but didn't press. The crowd was thinning now, the nobles retreating to their homes, the laborers gathering their jugs, the priests extinguishing the braziers. Inanna-Sar looked up at the ziggurat's peak, its outline sharp against the fading stars, and felt a pull not to the inner sanctum's secrets, but to the city itself, to the people who had danced drunk and prayed under Inanna's gaze. The Akitu was over, but its legacy would linger in the stories told, the offerings made, the bonds forged between the living and the dead. Inanna-Sar took a final sip of lily wine, its flavor now familiar, comforting, and turned to Enhedu. "What do you think the dead see when they drink with us?" she asked, her voice soft. Enhedu shrugged, her grin returning. "Maybe they see us, still dancing, still trying to make Inanna proud." Inanna-Sar laughed, the sound light against the night's weight, and together they walked down the ziggurat steps, the city quieting around them. The tombs were out there, waiting, their offerings a promise that Uruk's story would never end. But as Inanna-Sar glanced back at the ziggurat, its stones glowing faintly in the dawn's first light, she knew the festival was only part of the story. There was more to Uruk, to Inanna, to the rituals that had shaped her night, her city, her soul. The Sakaru, the lilies, the Connectum, the shumma, they were threads in her tapestry, one that stretched from the Euphrates to the stars, from the living to the dead, from the past to the future. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the ziggurat, Inanna-Sar felt a spark of something new, a vow to carry this legacy forward, to weave her own thread into Uruk's eternal weave, a story that deserved to be told, remembered, and celebrated, just as the gods had always intended. As the first rays of dawn kissed the ziggurat's weathered stones, Inanna-Sar stood at the edge of Uruk's heart, her eyes tracing the city's silhouette against the paling sky, her breath mingling with the fading scent of Connectum smoke and the sweet aftertaste of lily wine still lingering on her lips. The Akitu Festival had quieted, its drums now silent, its revelers drifting home through streets littered with spilled Sakaru and scattered petals, their voices softened to whispers of exhaustion and awe. Inanna-Sar's robes were heavy with the night's dust, her body weary from the dance, the offerings, and the fleeting, fiery touch of the shumma that had shown her glimpses of a world beyond her own. Yet as she gazed out over Uruk, its clay houses, and towering ziggurat bathed in the soft gold of morning, she felt a spark within her a vow, not just to serve Inanna, but to carry the city's story forward, to weave its rituals, its passions, its secrets into the tapestry of time. The festival had been more than a night of frenzy. It was a mirror of Uruk itself, a city that lived and breathed through its people, its gods, and its dead, each bound by the sacred acts of brewing, burning, and remembering. Inanna-Sar's journey through the night had begun with the humble Sakaru, its earthy warmth grounding her in the labor of her hands, its bubbles a prayer to Enki's wisdom. She had steeped the lily wine, its golden shimmer lifting her closer to Inanna's light, its petals a symbol of rebirth that echoed the goddess's triumph over death. The Connectum smoke had opened her mind, its curling tendrils carrying her prayers to the heavens, while the Shama, forbidden and fierce, had tested her, showing her visions that blurred the line between mortal and divine. And in the quiet of the tombs, she had poured offerings for the dead, tying the living to the ancestors who watched from the shadows, their presence as real as the ziggurat itself. Now, as the city stirred awake, Inanna-Sar felt the weight of it all, not a burden, but a gift, a thread in the eternal weave of Uruk's story. She walked slowly down the ziggurat's steps, her sandals brushing against petals and clay shards, each step a reminder of the night's chaos and beauty. The Euphrates glittered in the distance, its waters reflecting the dawn, and she thought of the lilies that grew along its banks, their roots deep in the earth, their petals reaching for the sky. Uruk was like those lilies, she realized, rooted in the dust of the past, yet always striving for something greater, something eternal. The festival had been a single night, but its rituals were timeless, etched in the cuneiform tablets that lined the temple's walls in the vessels unearthed by archaeologists millennia later, in the stories whispered by mothers to daughters, by priestesses to initiates. Inanna-Sar paused at the ziggurat's base, where the altar for the dead still stood, its surface stained with sikaru and dusted with ash from the Connectum. She touched the stone, her fingers lingering on the cool surface, and felt a connection to every priestess who had stood here before her, every soul who had danced under Inanna's gaze. The Akitu was not just a celebration, it was a promise, a vow that Uruk would endure, that its gods would be honored, that its people would never forget the power of their rituals. Cuneiform records from Uruk, painstakingly deciphered by scholars, tell us of a city that thrived on this balance of devotion and ecstasy, where beer was currency, wine was a ladder to the divine, and smoke was a bridge to the gods. Archaeological finds, vats of fermented barley, traces of myrrh, and cannabis vessels filled with offerings paint a picture of a people who lived fully, who saw no boundary between the sacred and the joyful, who wove their lives into the myths they cherished. Inanna-Sar understood this now, not as a lesson from Ninsenlil or a tale from her mother, but as a truth she had lived, tasted, breathed. She thought of Enhedu, her friend's laughter a bright thread in the night's tapestry, and wondered if she too had felt the Shama's pull, if she too had seen the lion's gaze in the smoke. She thought of Ninsenlil, her mentor's stern wisdom a guide through the festival's chaos, and wondered what secrets she still held, what visions she had seen in the inner sanctum. And she thought of the dead, their spirits nourished by the offerings she had poured, their presence a quiet strength that made Uruk more than a city, it was a legacy, a story that refused to fade. Inanna-Sar's gaze lifted to the ziggurat's peak, where the first priests were emerging, their faces serene, their robes dusted with ash from the night's rites. She wondered what they had seen, what the Shama had shown them, but she knew those answers were not for her, not yet. Her role was here, among the people, among the altars, among the stories that bound Uruk together. She saw a group of laborers sweeping the streets, their voices low as they recounted the night's highlights, their laughter echoing the festival's joy. She saw nobles gathering their cloaks, their eyes heavy with wine and wonder, and she saw children chasing each other through the dust, their games a shadow of the dances that had shaken the ziggurat. Uruk was alive, its heartbeat steady, its spirit unbroken, and Inanna-Sar felt a surge of pride, not just for her city, but for her place in it. The rituals of the Akitu were not just acts of devotion, they were acts of creation, forging a bond between the people, their gods, and their ancestors that no time could erode. She walked toward the temple, where Ninsenlil was overseeing the final cleanup, her hands sorting through the remaining offerings with the same care she'd shown the night before. Inanna-Sar joined her, picking up a jug of sikaru that had somehow survived the revelry, its contents still faintly bubbling. For the next festival, she asked, her voice light but her eyes searching. Ninsenlil's lips curved into a rare smile. For the gods, she said, and for us. Inanna-Sar nodded, understanding that the rituals were never truly over, that each festival was a link in a chain stretching back to Uruk's founding, and forward to a future she could only imagine. She thought of the Shama, its vision still a faint echo in her mind, and wondered if she would ever taste it again. if she would ever stand in the inner sanctum and see what the high priest saw. But for now, she was content to be here in the dust and dawn of Uruk, a priestess carrying the weight of her city's story. The temple courtyard was quiet now, the braziers cold, the lily wine cups empty. But the air still hummed with the memory of the night, with the chants, the smoke, the dance. Inanna-Sar looked out over the city, its houses waking to the new day, its people carrying the festival's light in their hearts. She thought of the tombs, their silent offerings a promise that the dead were never truly gone, that they danced with the living under Inanna's watchful gaze. And she thought of the gods, their presence felt in every sip, every scent, every step of the night's rituals. Uruk was more than a city. It was a living myth, a story told in clay and fire, in beer and wine, in smoke and song. Inanna-Sar took a deep breath, the morning air cool and clean, and made a silent vow to carry this story forward, to honor Inanna, to honor Uruk, to honor the ancestors who had shaped her world. The Akitu was over, but its legacy was eternal, a thread in the great weave of Mesopotamia, a story that would echo through the ages in the tablets we uncover, in the vessels we study, in the rituals we imagine. And as she stepped into the temple, her heart full of purpose clear, Inanna-Sar knew that this was only the beginning, that Uruk's story was hers to tell, hers to live, hers to share with a world that still hungered for the magic of the past. So, as the sun rose higher, bathing Uruk in light, she turned to the future, ready to weave the next thread to carry the city's heart into the dawn, into eternity, into the story that never ends. And to you, watching this journey unfold on History Orbit, we ask, what thread will you weave into your own story? Subscribe, share your thoughts below, and let's keep Uruk's legacy alive together, under the stars that still shine over the cradle of civilization.